The machete sliced through the dense undergrowth, each swing releasing a cloud of moisture into the humid air. 4 hunters from San Miguel de la Selva pushed deeper into the seldom-traveled section of the Peruvian Amazon. They followed animal tracks, hoping to bring back enough meat for the upcoming harvest festival. Victor, the eldest of the group, stopped abruptly. His weathered hand shot up, signaling the others to halt. "Something's not right," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the symphony of insects. "The birds have gone silent." The jungle, normally alive with sound, had indeed fallen eerily quiet. The men exchanged uneasy glances as Victor cautiously moved forward, pushing aside a curtain of vines. What lay beyond made him stumble backward, crossing himself instinctively. In a small clearing beneath the sprawling, twisted roots of a massive lupuna tree, a tree the locals believed housed powerful spirits, sat a human skeleton, not scattered by animals or the elements, but arranged with unmistakable purpose. The bones gleamed white against the dark earth, positioned in a cross-legged posture of deep meditation. The skull was tilted downward, empty eye sockets facing the ground. The skeletal hands rested deliberately on the knee bones. "Guardian of the threshold," Victor breathed, recognizing the sacred posture immediately. Around the remains, a perfect circle of stones stained with ochre bore symbols known only to the most initiated practitioners of the old ways. Clay vessels containing dried herbs and colorful feathers surrounded the macabre tableau. This was no accidental discovery. This was a ritual site. As realization dawned, the men knew exactly whose remains they were looking at. For 18 months, their village had whispered about the fate of Tadeo Iruya, their revered shaman who had vanished without a trace on a night when the jungle itself seemed to hold its breath. Now, his bones had been found, not scattered by predators or hidden from view, but arranged in the most sacred of poses, a position reserved only for those who had made the ultimate sacrifice to protect their people. But who had arranged him this way, and what happened to the man who had guided their community through generations of hardship and prosperity? The mystery that had haunted San Miguel de la Selva was about to deepen in ways no one could have imagined. Before we journey deeper into the Amazon secrets, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you surrounded by city lights or nestled in nature? Comment below and subscribe now to join our community of mystery seekers at Last Seen Stories. Every subscription helps us uncover more chilling disappearances like this one. San Miguel de la Selva wasn't on any tourist map. The village of roughly 200 souls clung to the banks of a tributary of the Amazon River, 3 days by boat from the nearest town with electricity. Ancient ceiba trees with their massive buttressed roots stood like sentinels around its perimeter. Wooden huts with thatched roofs clustered near the water's edge, smoke from cooking fires rising in thin columns above them. For as long as anyone could remember, Tadeo Iruya had been their connection to the unseen world. Though only 63 when he disappeared, his eyes held the wisdom of centuries. His small frame carried itself with quiet dignity, moving through the village with unhurried purpose. Children would fall silent when he passed, not from fear, but from instinctive respect. Tadeo knew things before they happened, explained Elena Machado, one of the village elders. When the Great Flood came in '94, he had us move our stores to higher ground 3 days before the waters rose. When Jorge's daughter fell ill with fever, Tadeo appeared at their door with the proper herbs before anyone had called for him. His home stood slightly apart from the others, a humble structure distinguished only by the medicinal plants that grew around it in careful arrangements. Inside, bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams. Shelves lined with clay pots of remedies and ritual items covered the walls. A fire pit in the center served both for warmth and for brewing the ayahuasca, the sacred plant medicine used in ceremonies to commune with the spirit world. For generations, Tadeo had guided villagers through birth, illness, death, and the countless challenges of life in the rainforest. His ceremonies marked the changing seasons, blessed new homes, and healed both physical and spiritual ailments. He was doctor, counselor, priest, and historian rolled into one. But in recent years, San Miguel de la Selva had begun to change. 20 miles downriver, a logging company had established an outpost. The distant whine of chainsaws became a daily intrusion, growing steadily closer. Ancient trees that had stood for centuries began to fall. Tadeo fought them in ways we couldn't understand, recalled Domingo Vargas, a fisherman. Not with weapons or threats. He would walk into the forest at night and perform rituals at the boundaries of our lands. The next day, equipment would mysteriously malfunction. Workers would fall ill with strange symptoms. Then came the missionaries. Led by Pastor Thomas Daniels, a group of evangelical Christians arrived with promises of education and medical supplies. They built a small church near the village center and began holding services that condemned the demonic practices of the traditional ways. They called Tadeo a servant of the devil, Elena said bitterly. They told our children that the ceremonies that had protected us for generations were pathways to hell. Caught between the physical threat of the loggers and the spiritual challenge of the missionaries, the village began to fracture. Some families, particularly younger ones, were drawn to the promises of modernity and salvation. Others clung more fiercely to the traditional ways, placing their trust in Tadeo and the ancient knowledge he preserved. The shaman himself remained outwardly unperturbed, continuing his daily routines of gathering plants, brewing medicines, and performing rituals. But those closest to him noticed a growing heaviness in his eyes, a deepening of the lines in his face. The battle for San Miguel's soul was taking its toll, even on its most steadfast guardian. The catalyst came on a Tuesday. 6-year-old Miguel Rosario awoke with a slight fever. By nightfall, his small body convulsed with seizures. His desperate parents carried him to Tadeo, who immediately began preparing remedies from his most potent herbs. For 3 days, the shaman worked tirelessly, barely sleeping as he chanted, applied poultices, and administered teas. But on the 4th morning, Miguel's body lay still. The village plunged into mourning. Children had died before, said Diego Rosario, Miguel's father, his voice hollow with grief, even months later. This is the jungle. Life is fragile here, but this was different. Miguel was strong, healthy. The sickness came too quickly, took him too fast. Whispers began to circulate. Some said the child's death was punishment from the spirits, angered by the village's flirtation with the missionaries' religion. Others suggested more sinister possibilities, that the loggers had contaminated the water with chemicals, or that Tadeo's powers were waning with age. Pastor Daniels seized the opportunity. At Miguel's funeral, he spoke passionately about salvation and the promise of heaven, a stark contrast to the traditional belief that the child's spirit would journey through the forest to join the ancestors. His words found fertile ground in the grief-stricken community. The night after the funeral, Tadeo retreated to his hut. Visitors reported hearing him chanting for hours, the rhythmic sound occasionally punctuated by deep, guttural cries, unlike anything they had heard from him before. As darkness settled over the village, Tadeo emerged from his dwelling. He wore his ceremonial attire, layers of hand-woven cloth dyed with natural pigments, intricate patterns representing his connection to the spirit world. Around his neck hung multiple strands of seeds, animal teeth, and carved wooden amulets. He carried his weathered staff, a twisted piece of hardwood topped with feathers and crystals, and a small pouch containing sacred ayahuasca vines. His face was different that night, recalled Maria Iruya, Tadeo's niece and closest living relative. I saw him pass my house. There was resolution in his eyes, like someone who has made a difficult decision. Maria called out to him, but Taddeo merely turned, offering a sad smile and a slight nod before continuing toward the edge of the village. Several villagers reported seeing him that night. Some said he appeared to be in a trance, moving with purpose but not fully present. Others insisted he seemed perfectly lucid, stopping to place his hand on certain trees as if in farewell. Domingo Vargas was the last to see him. I was mending my nets by the river when he passed. He told me, "The forest knows its children. Remember that when the time comes." Then he walked into the trees. The darkness swallowed him whole. By morning, Taddeo had not returned, unusual for him even after night ceremonies. By midday, concern had spread throughout San Miguel. By evening, the first search party ventured into the forest, calling his name into the gathering darkness. In the days that followed, conflicting theories emerged. Some believed Taddeo had embarked on a spiritual journey to seek answers about Miguel's death, perhaps taking ayahuasca alone in the forest, a dangerous practice even for experienced shamans. Others feared he had fled in shame after failing to save the boy. The most troubling whispers suggested foul play. The loggers had threatened him before, Maria said, her voice tight with anger. 2 weeks earlier, Lucas Ferreira, the operation manager, came to the village. I overheard him telling Taddeo that accidents happen in the jungle all the time. Pastor Daniels offered a different perspective. The man was clearly troubled, he told concerned villagers. The death of the child showed the limitations of his practices. Perhaps he sought escape from the shame of failure. But Maria Iruya rejected these explanations. "My uncle would never abandon us," she insisted. "Something happened to him that night. Someone wanted him gone." As a child, Maria had followed Taddeo through the forest, learning the names and properties of plants, assisting in minor ceremonies. Though she had not formally trained as a shaman, she carried more knowledge of the old ways than anyone else in the village. And she was certain Taddeo had not left voluntarily. The question remained, if someone had wanted the shaman gone, who had the most to gain from his disappearance? The search for Taddeo Iruya began with hope, but quickly descended into frustration. Hunting parties combed the surrounding forest in ever-widening circles, following game trails and barely visible paths that only the most experienced jungle dwellers could discern. "We searched for weeks," said Victor, who led many of the expeditions. "We followed every path he might have taken, checked every sacred site where he might have gone to perform rituals. The dense undergrowth yielded no footprints. The constant rain washed away any scent trail that dogs might have followed. The jungle, with its ability to reclaim and obscure, had swallowed Taddeo without a trace. After 10 days, word reached the nearest town with a police presence. 2 officers arrived, city men uncomfortable in the jungle environment. Their investigation consisted mainly of asking basic questions through translators and filling out forms that disappeared into a file once they returned to their station. They treated it like a routine matter, Maria recalled bitterly, as if an old man wandering off into the forest was a natural occurrence, nothing to be concerned about. The officers suggested that Taddeo had likely been taken by a jaguar or had fallen into the river. When villagers protested that a man of Taddeo's experience would not succumb to such common dangers, the policemen exchanged knowing glances. "These jungle people and their superstitions," one officer was overheard saying as they departed. "The old man probably just went off to die alone. It's what animals do." As weeks turned to months, the physical search for Taddeo gradually gave way to spiritual rituals. Elders left offerings at the forest edge, small bundles of tobacco, cups of traditional chicha corn beer, arrangements of flowers and feathers. They sang the ancient songs that Taddeo had taught them, hoping to guide his spirit home if he had indeed passed to the other world. But as time passed, San Miguel de la Selva began to change. the evangelical church grew stronger in Tadeo's absence. Pastor Daniels, with his promises of salvation and connection to the outside world, drew more converts each week. Children who once would have learned traditional songs now recited Bible verses. It was as if a vacuum had formed when Tadeo vanished, Elena explained, and nature abhors a vacuum. The pastor was ready to fill that spiritual void. Meanwhile, the logging operation expanded. Without Tadeo's mysterious influence causing equipment failures and worker illnesses, the company pushed deeper into the forest. The sounds of chainsaws and heavy machinery grew closer, and trucks loaded with ancient timber began to pass near the village boundaries. Tadeo would weep to see the forest now, Domingo said, gesturing toward newly created clearings visible from the river. They're taking trees that were old when our grandfathers' grandfathers were children. 6 months after the disappearance, a stranger arrived in San Miguel. Dr. Mateo Suarez introduced himself as an anthropologist from the National University in Lima, come to document indigenous traditions before they disappeared entirely. With his university credentials and government permits, even Pastor Daniels could not prevent him from setting up residence in the village. But Dr. Suarez was not exactly what he claimed to be. Though indeed an anthropologist, he had deeper connections to the region than he initially revealed. "My grandmother was Shipibo," he admitted to Maria after gaining her trust. "She was a curandera, a healer, like your uncle. I grew up hearing her stories about the old ways, the plant medicines, the connection to the forest spirits. When I heard about a missing shaman and the rapid changes happening here, I knew I had to come." Dr. Suarez began methodically interviewing villagers, recording their memories of Tadeo and the traditions he had maintained. He took particular interest in the circumstances surrounding the shaman's disappearance. "There are too many coincidences," he told Maria one evening as they reviewed his notes. "A child dies mysteriously. The shaman who opposed both the loggers and the missionaries vanishes. Suddenly, both groups make rapid advances in the community. This is not just cultural change. This is cultural replacement following the removal of its primary defender." 12 months after Tadeo's disappearance, San Miguel de la Selva had transformed almost beyond recognition. A satellite dish appeared on the roof of the church. The first motorcycles arrived, brought in by boat to navigate the wider jungle paths. Young people began to leave for opportunities in distant towns. The old ways were fading, and still there was no sign of Tadeo Iruya. 18 months to the day after Tadeo vanished, Victor and his hunting party stumbled upon the ritual site beneath the lupuna tree. The discovery sent shockwaves through San Miguel de la Selva. Word spread rapidly. By nightfall, a procession of villagers made their way to the site, guided by the hunters. They moved silently through the forest, flashlights illuminating the narrow path. When they reached the clearing, gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. The scene was exactly as the hunters had described. The bleached bones arranged in the sacred guardian of the threshold pose, the circle of ochre-stained stones, the clay vessels filled with ritual items. In the beams of their flashlights, the symbols painted on the stones seemed to shift and dance, ancient words in a language few still understood. "Only a shaman would know how to prepare a body this way," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is the position of ultimate protection, of a guardian who watches over the boundary between worlds." Dr. Suarez moved carefully around the perimeter, taking photographs and making notes. "Don't touch anything," he cautioned. "This is both a ritual site and potential crime scene." Maria knelt at the edge of the stone circle, tears streaming down her face. "Tio," she said softly, addressing her uncle, "what happened to you?" The villagers maintained a vigil through the night, singing the traditional songs that had been increasingly forgotten. Even some who had converted to the missionaries' religion joined in, drawn back to their roots by the power of the discovery. By morning, the police had been notified. This time, a more substantial response arrived. A detective from Iquitos, the regional capital, accompanied by a forensic technician and 4 officers. They cordoned off the area with yellow tape, an incongruous intrusion of modernity into the ancient forest setting. The detective, a man named Ortega with indigenous features and city mannerisms, examined the scene with professional detachment. "How can we be certain these are the remains of Tadeo Iruya?" he asked. Dr. Suarez pointed out several identifying features: a distinctive dental pattern, a healed fracture in the left forearm that matched an injury Tadeo had sustained years earlier, and the remnants of ritual clothing that still clung to some parts of the skeleton. Most convincing was a small jade pendant found among the bones, a family heirloom that Maria confirmed had belonged to her uncle and which he never removed. "These are Tadeo's remains, Doctor," Suarez stated firmly. "The question is, how did he die, and who arranged his bones in this ritual pose afterward?" The forensic examination yielded few immediate answers. There were no obvious signs of trauma to the skull or other indicators of violent death. The bones had been exposed to the elements and possibly animal scavengers before being arranged in their current position, making determination of cause of death difficult. "The arrangement itself is significant, Doctor," Suarez explained to Detective Ortega. "The guardian of the threshold is a position of great spiritual power. It's reserved for shamans who have made the ultimate sacrifice to protect their community." Traditionally, Maria added, this position would only be used for ritual burial of a shaman who willingly offered his life to counter a grave threat to the village. Ortega frowned. "Are you suggesting he committed suicide as some kind of sacrifice?" "No," Maria said firmly. "My uncle would never take his own life. Someone killed him, and someone else, someone who knew the old ways, arranged his remains like this afterward." As villagers crowded around the perimeter of the police tape, reactions to the discovery varied dramatically. The elders who had maintained the traditional ways saw confirmation of their worst fears: their spiritual leader had been murdered. Some of the converts to the missionary church crossed themselves, whispering about pagan rituals and demonic influences. Pastor Daniels arrived, his face a mask of appropriate concern. "This is a tragic discovery," he announced loudly. "We should pray for this man's soul." From the edge of the gathering, Lucas Ferreira watched silently, his expression unreadable. The logging company manager had appeared shortly after the police, claiming he was in the area inspecting timber prospects. Dr. Suarez noticed how Ferreira's eyes lingered on the ritual arrangement, a muscle twitching in his jaw. When their gazes met, Ferreira quickly looked away. The mystery deepens with these ritual-posed remains, hit like if you've ever felt that thin veil between our world and the spiritual realm. Stay with me as we unravel what happened to Tadeo. As the village absorbed the shock of the discovery, Dr. Suarez pulled Maria aside. "There's something important about this arrangement," he whispered. "The symbols on these stones, they're not just ritual markings, they're a message." Maria looked at him sharply. "What kind of message?" "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "But I recognize some of these symbols from my grandmother's teachings. They're not just for protection, they're accusations. Someone is trying to tell us who was responsible for Tadeo's death." The official investigation proceeded slowly, hampered by the remote location and limited resources. Detective Ortega established a temporary base in the village community building, interviewing villagers with varying degrees of success. Many were reluctant to speak freely, casting nervous glances toward both the church and the forest. Dr. Suarez and Maria, however, conducted their own parallel investigation. With his academic credentials and her local knowledge, they formed an effective partnership, gathering information that eluded the official police effort. "We need to understand who had motives to want your uncle gone," Dr. Suarez said, as they sat in his simple quarters, a table between them covered with notes and diagrams. And we need to identify who might have arranged his remains in the ritual pose afterward. They might not be the same person. They began by interviewing villagers who had been closest to Tadeo. These conversations happened in hushed tones, often under the guise of recording traditional knowledge for Dr. Suarez's anthropological research. Tadeo knew he was in danger, Elena told them during one such session. In the weeks before he disappeared, he began teaching Maria more intensively. It was as if he was trying to pass on as much knowledge as possible before. Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Tadeo had sensed his time was limited. Another breakthrough came when Victor recalled something strange about the night of Tadeo's disappearance. There was a vehicle, he said, frowning as he struggled to remember details. A truck parked at the old logging trail. We didn't think much of it then. The logging company often left vehicles overnight, but it was gone the next morning. This information led them to interview workers from the logging camp. Most refused to talk, but one, a young man named Alejandro, who had recently been fired, proved more forthcoming. Ferreira had a meeting that night, he revealed, glancing around nervously to ensure no one overheard. Not with our crew, with outsiders. One of them was wearing a collar, like a priest. The most significant discovery came when Maria and Dr. Suarez searched Tadeo's hut, which had remained largely untouched since his disappearance. Behind a loose board in the floor, they found a small, waterproof container. Inside was a journal wrapped in oilcloth. Written in a mixture of Spanish and indigenous Shipibo language, the journal documented Tadeo's growing concerns in the months before his disappearance. He had recorded conversations overheard, patterns of illness in the village, and movements of the logging company. They seek not just timber, but something deeper, one entry read. Ferreira has asked questions about the old gold deposits. He believes there is a vein beneath our sacred groves. Even more disturbing were Tadeo's notes about Pastor Daniels. The missionary speaks of salvation while pointing the loggers to our most sacred sites. Today I saw him marking trees with small notches, the same trees where our ancestors placed offerings. These are not random targets. The journal ended abruptly with an entry from the day before Tadeo's disappearance. Tonight, I will confront them both. The spirits have shown me that little Miguel's death was no accident. The water from the upper stream contained something that should not be there. They are testing something, a method to clear us from this land. I must stop this before more children die. Armed with this new information, Dr. Suarez and Maria decided to confront the two prime suspects directly. They found Lucas Ferreira at the logging camp, reviewing maps in his prefabricated office. The manager's initial professional smile faded when he realized the purpose of their visit. "Tadeo Iruya," he said, leaning back in his chair with forced casualness. "Of course I remember him. A shame what happened. Old man probably got lost in the jungle." "His remains were found in a ritual pose," Dr. Suarez said, watching Ferreira's reaction carefully. "Someone with knowledge of indigenous traditions arranged them that way." A flicker of something, concern, fear, crossed Ferreira's face before his expression hardened. "I run a legitimate business here. We have all the proper permits. Whatever happened to the village witch doctor has nothing to do with us." "What about the gold deposits?" Maria asked bluntly. Ferreira's composure cracked momentarily. "What gold?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "My uncle knew what you were really looking for," Maria pressed. "He knew the logging was just a cover." Ferreira stood abruptly. "I think this conversation is over. Unless you have an official reason to be here, I'll have to ask you to leave." Their meeting with Pastor Daniels proved equally revealing in its evasions. They found him at the church, supervising the installation of new speakers for his services. "Tadeo Iruya was a man caught between worlds," the pastor said smoothly when questioned. "He clung to outdated beliefs while his people needed to move forward. I prayed for his soul, but he rejected the true path to salvation. "Did you meet with Lucas Ferreira the night Tadeo disappeared?" Dr. Suarez asked directly. The pastor's eyes narrowed slightly. "I meet with many people to discuss the needs of this community." "Including marking sacred trees for logging?" Maria challenged. "I merely help identify locations where the company can extract resources with minimal impact on the village," Daniels replied. "The profits benefit everyone. We're building a school, bringing electricity. These are real improvements, not superstitious rituals." As they left the church, Maria turned to Dr. Suarez. "They're both lying, and they're working together." Dr. Suarez nodded grimly. "But proving it will be difficult. We need more evidence than a dead man's journal and circumstantial connections." Meanwhile, Detective Ortega had received the preliminary forensic analysis. Without specialized laboratory equipment on site, the examination had been limited. But the technician had made one significant discovery: trace amounts of an unidentified chemical compound in the soil surrounding the bones. It could be nothing, Ortega told them when they shared their findings. Or it could be evidence of poisoning. We'll need to send samples to Lima for proper analysis. That will take weeks. Time was working against them. With each passing day, the logging operation moved closer to the sacred groves, and more villagers aligned themselves with Pastor Daniels' church. The truth about Tadeo's death and the message in the ritual arrangement of his bones needed to be uncovered before all traces of the old ways disappeared forever. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Alejandro, the fired logging worker, approached Maria one evening with a thumb drive. "Ferreira kept financial records on his computer," he explained, handing over the small device. "I copied them before I left. I thought they might help prove the illegal cutting they've been doing in protected areas." Dr. Suarez spent the night analyzing the files. What he found went far beyond illegal logging. "There are payments," he told Maria the next morning, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Regular transfers to a foundation called New Light Ministry, Pastor Daniels' organization. And here," he pointed to a spreadsheet on his laptop, "geological survey results showing gold deposits exactly where your uncle's journal mentioned." More damning were email exchanges between Ferreira and various officials, including local police. One message, dated 2 days after Tadeo's disappearance, contained a chilling line. "The Shaman situation has been handled. No further action required." "They bribed the police to abandon the investigation," Maria said, her voice tight with anger. "It goes deeper than that," Dr. Suarez replied. "Look at this." He opened another document, a contract between the logging company and New Light Ministry. The church gets 10% of all mining profits in exchange for community pacification services. They're systematically dismantling the traditional culture to make way for mining operations. Armed with this evidence, they approached Detective Ortega, who reviewed the materials with increasing concern. "This is enough for me to request warrants," he said finally, "but my superiors may block it. There are powerful interests involved here." Ortega's prediction proved accurate. His request for search warrants was denied, and he was ordered to conclude the investigation, ruling Tadeo's death as natural causes. "They're shutting it down," he told Dr. Suarez and Maria, meeting them secretly at the edge of the village. "I've been ordered back to Iquitos tomorrow. But I'm not giving up. I have a contact at the National Prosecutor's Office who specializes in indigenous rights cases. I'll take everything we have to her." With the official investigation closing, Dr. Suarez and Maria redoubled their efforts. They needed to understand the full truth before Ortega's evidence reached the prosecutor. A key insight came when they revisited the ritual site. The police tape had been removed, but the arrangement remained undisturbed, protected by the villagers' fear of disturbing the dead. "Look at how precisely everything is positioned," Dr. Suarez observed. "The skull faces northwest, toward the sacred mountain. The clay vessels are arranged in a pattern that mimics the constellation the Shipibo call the Shaman's Path. This wasn't done hastily. Someone spent hours creating this tableau. But who, Maria wondered, who would have both the knowledge of the rituals and the opportunity to arrange my uncle this way? The answer came from Elena, who had been reflecting on the events surrounding Tadeo's disappearance. There was a boy, she said, Carlos Tamani. He was Tadeo's apprentice, not officially, but he followed your uncle everywhere, Maria. Tadeo was teaching him in secret because the boy's parents had joined the church and forbidden the old ways. I remember him, Maria said, but he left the village shortly after my uncle disappeared. His family sent him to relatives in Pucallpa, Elena explained. They said he was traumatized by Tadeo's disappearance, but before he left, he changed. He stopped speaking almost entirely, and he would disappear into the forest for hours. Dr. Suarez and Maria exchanged significant looks. We need to find Carlos, Dr. Suarez said. Through a network of contacts in indigenous communities, they located Carlos Tamani in Pucallpa, a larger river town several days' journey from San Miguel. Now 17, he worked at a tourist hotel catering to foreigners seeking ayahuasca experiences. When confronted, Carlos initially denied any knowledge of Tadeo's fate. But when Maria showed him a photograph of the ritual arrangement, his composure cracked. I found him, Carlos admitted, tears streaming down his face. 6 months after he disappeared. I was gathering plants in an area where he had taught me, far from the village. Animals had scattered some of his remains, but I recognized his clothing, his pendant. You arranged his bones in the guardian pose, Dr. Suarez said gently. Why? Because I saw what happened to him, Carlos replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. I followed him that night. I saw him confront Ferreira and Pastor Daniels near the old logging trail. They were with 2 other men, loggers, I think. Tadeo accused them of poisoning the water to drive the village away, of causing Miguel's death. Carlos described how the confrontation escalated. Ferreira denied everything at first, but when Tadeo revealed he had water samples and evidence, the situation turned violent. They didn't mean to kill him, I think, Carlos continued. One of the loggers hit him with something, a tool of some kind. Tadeo fell. He didn't get up. They panicked, carried his body into the forest. I was too afraid to do anything that night. But you found him later, Maria prompted. Carlos nodded. I searched for months. When I finally found him, I knew what I had to do. Tadeo had taught me the guardian ritual, how it's used to turn a shaman's spirit into a protector. I gathered what I needed over several weeks. I arranged everything according to the old traditions. The symbols on the stones, Dr. Suarez asked. They're accusations, aren't they? Yes, Carlos confirmed. They tell the story of what happened to Tadeo and who was responsible. I knew someday someone who could read them would find him. With Carlos's testimony and the financial evidence, they now had enough to present a compelling case. Dr. Suarez prepared a comprehensive report for Detective Ortega to take to the national prosecutor. But they had underestimated their opponents. When they returned to San Miguel, they found the village in turmoil. Pastor Daniels had announced a major expansion of the church funded by a generous donation from the logging company. Meanwhile, Ferreira had accelerated the operation, bringing in additional equipment that rumbled day and night at the forest edge. They know we're close to exposing them, Dr. Suarez realized. They're trying to complete as much as possible before they're stopped. More worrying was the news that Detective Ortega had been reassigned to a remote post near the Colombian border, effectively removing him from the investigation. His replacement, a detective known for his corporate-friendly stance, arrived with instructions to close the case immediately. We're running out of time, Maria said. If we don't act now, they'll destroy everything my uncle tried to protect. We're close to exposing the truth behind this ritual arrangement. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the conclusion to this Amazonian mystery. The final pieces fell into place through an unexpected ally. Pastor Daniels's assistant, a young man named Miguel, who had grown increasingly troubled by his employer's activities, approached Dr. Suarez with a confession. "I can't be part of this anymore," he said, sliding a USB drive across the table. "It's all here, recordings of Pastor Daniels's meetings with Ferreira, plans for the mining operation, everything." The recordings were damning. In one, Ferreira and Daniels discussed the Shaman problem explicitly, weighing options for removing Tadeo's influence. Another, dated the day after Tadeo's disappearance, captured them discussing how to handle the body and make sure nothing is traced back to us. Most disturbing was a recent recording where they planned to destroy the ritual site, erasing the evidence of Tadeo's remains now that the official investigation had concluded. "They're going to bulldoze the entire area tomorrow," Miguel warned. "They're calling it preparation for the new community center." Armed with this critical evidence, Dr. Suarez made an urgent call to his contact at the National Geographic Society, who had connections with both international media and government officials interested in indigenous rights. Within hours, a plan was set in motion. That night, Maria gathered the village elders and those still loyal to the traditional ways. "Tomorrow," she told them, "we must stand together to protect my uncle's final resting place. We need to delay the destruction until help arrives." At dawn, the villagers assembled at the ritual site. They formed a human chain around the lupuna tree and the arranged bones beneath it. Maria led them in the traditional songs Tadeo had taught them, songs of protection and perseverance. When Ferreira arrived with bulldozers and workers, he found his path blocked by dozens of villagers. "This is private property now," he shouted. "Clear the area or we'll have you removed." "This is ancestral land," Maria replied, her voice carrying over the crowd, "and these are the remains of our spiritual leader who you murdered." For a moment, tension hung in the air like the Amazon mist. Then, the distant sound of helicopter rotors broke the standoff. Two helicopters appeared over the treetops, one carrying a camera crew from an international news network, the other transporting officials from the National Indigenous Rights Commission and the Federal Prosecutor's Office. As cameras rolled, the officials presented Ferreira and Pastor Daniels with warrants for their arrest. The evidence compiled by Dr. Suarez, Maria, Carlos, and Detective Ortega, who had been recalled from his remote posting, was overwhelming. The ritual arrangement was the key, Dr. Suarez explained later to the prosecutors. It wasn't just a spiritual act, it was evidence preservation. Carlos positioned the remains in the guardian pose, not only as a ritual honor, but to ensure they would remain undisturbed until they could be discovered. The symbols painted on the stones surrounding Tadeo's remains, when properly translated, told the story of his murder with remarkable precision. They named the conspirators, described the weapon, and even indicated where evidence might be found. "My uncle taught Carlos how to create these symbols," Maria explained. "They are an ancient form of record-keeping used by shamans to preserve important events for future generations. Carlos used them to document the truth about Tadeo's death." Forensic experts confirmed what Carlos had witnessed. Tadeo had died from blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with being struck by a logging tool. Soil samples from the site contained traces of the same chemical compound found in the upper stream, a toxic byproduct of illegal gold extraction methods that the company had been testing. Perhaps most damning was the discovery of Tadeo's original remains. What Carlos had arranged was not the shaman's complete skeleton, but rather a ritual representation using some of his bones. Further investigation revealed that Ferreira and his men had initially buried Tadeo's body near the logging camp. Carlos, finding partial remains in the forest, had created the ritual site as both a spiritual act and a message to future investigators. When confronted with the mounting evidence, one of Ferreira's workers confessed, describing how they had ambushed Tadeo on his way back from the confrontation. The murder weapon, a logging spike, was recovered from where it had been hidden in the company storehouse. The guardian of the threshold ritual served its purpose, Dr. Suarez observed. Tadeo's spirit protected his people one final time by helping reveal the truth of his murder. 6 months after the dramatic arrests, justice began to take shape. Lucas Ferreira was sentenced to 20 years for murder, environmental crimes, and corruption. Pastor Daniels received 15 years for conspiracy and accessory to murder. Several local officials were also convicted on corruption charges for their role in covering up the investigation. The logging operation was shut down permanently, and the area containing the sacred groves was designated as protected indigenous territory. The government established a trust fund, funded by fines levied against the logging company, to support traditional culture and sustainable development in San Miguel de la Selva. On a clear morning during the next rainy season, the village gathered for a ceremonial reburial of Tadeo's remains. Now properly recovered and complete, they were laid to rest beneath the great lupuna tree where Carlos had created his ritual message. Maria, now formally recognized as the village's spiritual leader, led the ceremony. "My uncle's body was taken from us," she told the assembled villagers, "but his spirit remained, watching over us from the threshold between worlds until justice could be done." Dr. Suarez, who had decided to stay in San Miguel to document the revival of traditional practices, observed how the community had transformed once again. Many who had converted to the missionary church had returned to the traditional ways, finding a new appreciation for the wisdom that had guided their ancestors for generations. Tadeo's death nearly destroyed this community, he noted in his journal, but the discovery of his remains, arranged in that powerful ritual pose, ultimately saved it. The guardian of the threshold indeed protected his people, even from beyond death. Carlos Tamani returned to San Miguel, where Maria welcomed him as her apprentice. Together they began rebuilding the knowledge that had nearly been lost, teaching the younger generation the songs, remedies, and rituals that connected them to the forest and their ancestors. The evangelical church building was repurposed as a community center and school, where both traditional knowledge and modern subjects were taught side by side. Children learned to read and write in Spanish, while also learning the names of medicinal plants and the meanings of ancient symbols. Most significant was the renewed relationship between the villagers and their environment. The sounds of chainsaws were replaced by the natural symphony of the forest. Traditional sustainable harvesting practices were revived, allowing the community to thrive without destroying their surroundings. "The forest knows its children," Maria often repeated, echoing Tadeo's last words to Domingo Vargas. "And we have remembered that we are its children." 1 year after the reburial ceremony, a small monument was erected at the site, a simple stone marker engraved with the guardian of the threshold symbol. It stood as a reminder of how the ritual arrangement of a shaman's bones had spoken across the boundary between life and death, to reveal a truth that might otherwise have remained forever hidden in the depths of the Amazon. This haunting case reminds us that some mysteries emerge from the shadows when the time is right. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and tell me in the comments what aspect of this Amazonian mystery struck you most. Subscribe to Last Seen Stories for more chilling tales of disappearances and discoveries. The case of Tadeo Iruya remains one of the most compelling examples of how traditional knowledge and modern investigation can work together to uncover the truth. In the heart of the Amazon, where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds grows thin, a ritual arrangement of bones spoke volumes about greed, murder, and ultimately justice. For the people of San Miguel de la Selva, the guardian of the threshold continues his eternal vigil, ensuring that the delicate balance between progress and tradition, between the seen and unseen worlds, remains intact for generations to come.